Zelensky pushes back against Trump's peace plan. Russia must end the war it started. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Washington, D.C. at a time when the future of the war in Ukraine may be entering a decisive phase. His scheduled meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House is not just another diplomatic encounter. It could set the direction for how and when the war between Ukraine and Russia ends. The stakes are enormous. For Ukraine, it is about survival as an independent state. For the United States, it is about defining its role as the guarantor of European security. For Europe, it is about avoiding the nightmare of a new Iron Curtain. And for countries like India and others in the global south, the summit has the potential to reshape the global balance of power. On the eve of his meeting, Zelensky posted a strong message on social media. Ukraine, he said, will not accept a peace deal that involves giving up territory. His words, "Russia must end the war it started," were a direct rebuttal to Trump's earlier comments suggesting that territorial concessions might be necessary to bring peace. This clash of visions is now front and center in Washington. Trump's push for a quick settlement. To understand Trump's position, one has to look at his long record on Russia. Since his first presidential campaign in 2016, Trump has argued that the United States should reset relations with Moscow. He has consistently downplayed the idea that confrontation with Russia serves American interests, preferring instead to strike deals that he believes could stabilize global politics and reduce U.S. military commitments abroad. At the Alaska summit with Vladimir Putin, Trump took a step further. He recognized what he called the battlefield reality, that Ukraine, despite Western aid, was unlikely to achieve total military victory against Russia. He openly stated that prolonging the conflict would only cost more lives and money without changing the outcome. From his point of view, the logical solution is to negotiate. In practical terms, that means urging Zelensky to accept a ceasefire in exchange for territorial compromises. Trump argues this is not surrender, but pragmatism, an end to bloodshed, and a chance to rebuild. But this approach is highly controversial, both in Kyiv and in European capitals. Zelensky's firm stand for Zelensky, Trump's plan is unacceptable. The Ukrainian leader, who rose to power as a political outsider promising to clean up corruption, has now become the face of Ukraine's resistance against Russia's invasion. For him to agree to territorial concessions would not only undermine Ukraine's sovereignty, but also betray the sacrifices of millions of Ukrainians who have endured bombings, displacement, and the horrors of war. Zelensky has repeatedly emphasized that peace cannot come at the cost of justice. In his view, Russia started this war by violating international law, seizing Crimea in 2014 and later launching a full-scale invasion in 2022. To now reward Moscow with land would be to legitimize aggression and signal to other authoritarian regimes around the world that might makes right. He also faces domestic political realities. Within Ukraine, public opinion strongly favors resisting Russia at all costs. Any leader who agrees to concessions risks losing legitimacy, and in Zelensky's case, could even face political collapse. His statement in Washington, "Russia must end the war it started," reflects not only his personal conviction, but also the pressure he faces from his people. Europe's balancing act. The United States is not the only player in this drama. European leaders are also expected to attend key meetings during Zelensky's Washington visit. Their position is complicated. On one hand, European countries are desperate for peace. The war has drained resources, driven up energy prices, and caused political turmoil across the continent. Many leaders privately share Trump's assessment that Ukraine cannot win outright. But on the other hand, they fear the consequences of a bad peace deal. If Ukraine is forced to surrender land, it could embolden Russia to push further into Europe in the future. That is why European leaders insist that any peace agreement must come with robust security guarantees for Kyiv and the preservation of its freedom to choose alliances, particularly NATO. But here lies the dilemma. Europe cannot replace the United States as Ukraine's main backer. If Washington pulls back under Trump, Europe lacks both the military capacity and the political unity to carry the burden alone. This imbalance gives Trump immense leverage over the entire peace process, India, and the global South. While the headlines focus on Washington, the ripple effects of these talks extend worldwide. For countries like India, the outcome of Trump-Zelensky discussions could create both challenges and opportunities. India has carefully balanced its relations with Moscow and Washington since the war began. Russia remains a major defense supplier and energy partner, while the United States is India's most important trade and technology partner. A thaw in U.S. Russia relations could ease India's diplomatic tightrope, but it could also trigger new pressures, such as Trump's earlier threats of secondary tariffs on Indian purchases of Russian oil. More broadly, the global South is watching these talks with interest. Many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America see the Ukraine conflict not just as a regional war, but as a test of Western credibility. If the U.S. pushes Ukraine into concessions, it could reinforce the perception that great powers ultimately decide the fate of smaller nations. Possible scenarios. The Washington summit could lead to several outcomes, each with major consequences. Zelensky holds firm. If Zelensky refuses to budge, the immediate outcome may be deadlock. Trump could decide to reduce American support, leaving Ukraine vulnerable. This scenario would prolong the war, but weaken Kyiv's position over time. A compromise deal. If Zelensky, under pressure, accepts some form of territorial concessions, a ceasefire could be reached. But this would divide Europe, anger Ukrainian society, and potentially destabilize Zelensky's government. A staged peace process. Another possibility is a phased approach, starting with a ceasefire and humanitarian measures, followed by longer negotiations over territory. This would buy time, but might simply freeze the conflict rather than resolve it. A breakdown in diplomacy. If the talks collapse completely, relations between the U.S., Ukraine, and Europe could deteriorate. Russia may seize the moment to intensify its offensive, hoping to exploit divisions in the West. The broader stakes. This summit is not just about Ukraine. It is about the future of international order. If Trump's approach prevails, it may signal the end of America's traditional role as the guardian of European security. It would also raise doubts about the West's willingness to stand up to aggression, potentially emboldening other powers like China in Asia. For Zelensky, the choice is stark. Resist Trump's pressure and risk losing U.S. support, or compromise and risk losing his country's sovereignty. For Trump, the challenge is equally daunting. Deliver on his promise to end the war quickly, without looking like he handed Putin a victory. Conclusion. All eyes on Washington. As Zelensky begins his high-stakes meetings in Washington, one thing is clear. The next few days could determine the trajectory of the Ukraine war. Will there be a breakthrough toward peace, or will the divisions between Ukraine, the U.S., and Europe grow deeper? Zelensky's message remains unshaken. Ukraine will not trade its sovereignty for a temporary peace. Trump, however, insists that compromise is the only path forward. The outcome of this clash will shape not only the future of Ukraine, but also the credibility of Western unity and the balance of power in the 21st century. For now, the world watches and waits. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.